Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. In just a few moments, we're going to start this live call with Meena Srinivasan on mindfulness and SEL in service of belonging. And my name is Kaylee Isaacs. I'm the founder of the Awake Network. And when we begin, there's
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Sorry, folks.
In just a few moments, we're going to start this live call.
I had a video on in the background, so. We're going to be having some interaction through this call. So as Meena asks you questions, you're going to be able to respond to them in the comment section at the bottom of the page. So while we're waiting for just a couple more minutes, I encourage you to check out the comment section if you scroll to the bottom of the page and just take a moment to introduce yourself so we can see everyone that's tuning in and get to know each other a bit. And then we'll be getting started in just a moment. And for this call, we're going to be going for about 90 minutes. We're going to be doing a real deep dive into the topic with Meena, which is very exciting. And it might be a little bit shorter, but we're aiming for about 90 minutes. We had the plan to do this call together. We've been talking for several months, and I was really excited about the idea because I have so much respect for her work. So really excited that we're all able to share this together today. And so if you haven't taken a moment yet, go ahead and scroll down to the bottom of the page and enter in your name and where you're tuning in from so we can meet each other. And we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce Meena Srinivasan, who is a leader in the fields of mindfulness in education and social emotional learning. She's the executive director of transformative educational leadership. And prior to this role, she spent 5 years working in partnership with CASEL to implement SEL system-wide in the Oakland Unified School District. Meena is the author of SEL Every Day at Teach, Breathe, Learn, Mindfulness in and Out of the Classroom. Meena, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Kaylee, for having me. And I'd like to express my gratitude to all of you who are tuning in and zooming in. And Kaylee, I'm going to just start off doing a little screen share. Bear with me, folks. And I am zooming in. I'm speaking to you from Richmond, California. And Richmond, California, the traditional homeland of the Ohlone peoples. And so I'd like to just start off, for me, this work, mindfulness and SEL in service of belonging is very much rooted in interdependence. And so I'd like to acknowledge the land ancestors here, but invite all of us to just take a moment to acknowledge the land ancestors from wherever we may be calling in from. So just taking a moment to express our gratitude to the original stewards, the original inhabitants of the land that we now call home. Thank you. In places like Canada and New Zealand and many other places, a lot of meetings and even hockey games begin with land acknowledgements. And it's important for me, it's an important mindfulness practice for me to really start off that way. I want to thank you all again. There are so many other places you could be right now, yet you chose to be here in this virtual gathering. And how and where we direct our attention is what nourishes us. And that's a point that I'm going to really be emphasizing a lot today. And my hope by the end of our time together is that you're able to incorporate some more strategies for caring for yourself so you can care for others, that you deepen your understanding of mindfulness and SEL in service of belonging, and that you leave feeling a little more hopeful. This is a challenging time, and I think that it's important to bring some brightness into the world. And so in preparation for offering this webinar, I did my own listening campaign and talked with a lot of educators and educational leaders around what would be most helpful. And what I heard from folks is that the strategies for really caring for ourselves so we can care for others was coming up a lot. And so the majority of our time together is going to focus in on this first bullet point. But I do want to lift up this is a little sense-making graphic around how I make sense of my work. And my work really is centered on the integration of mindfulness, social and emotional learning, and belonging. And so we'll talk about this a little more today. And I'm giving you a little preview now, and we'll return to this at the end of our time together. But in a webinar where mindfulness is in the title, I'd really like to start us off with a little practice. So wherever you are, if you can just get in a comfortable position. And Thich Nhat Hanh is a very important teacher of mine. And I love this quote of his that seems to be surfacing a lot these days. And as I read this quote, I'm going to invite you to just let the words land into your body and being, and then we'll move into a little practice. So Thich Nhat Hanh says, when the crowded Vietnamese refugee boats met with storms or pirates, if everyone panicked, all would be lost. But if even one person on the boat remained calm and centered, it was enough. It showed the way for everyone to survive. The greatest gift we can offer others now is our presence. And I'm going to invite us to, if it feels safe for you, to gently close your eyes. And if it's accessible, you can place a hand on your heart or on your belly. And let's just begin with bringing awareness to our breathing. And as you bring awareness to your breath, breathing in and out of your heart space, touching this sense that your mother breathed for you when you were in the womb, just as her mother breathed for her. And when we're in the womb, our mothers breathe for us and send oxygen to our developing organs. And as you breathe, I invite you to bring to mind a land ancestor, a spiritual ancestor, or a blood ancestor, because those who have come before us have also gone through extremely challenging times. You can also bring to mind someone who is a beautiful model of resilience for you. And as you bring this being to mind, really asking for their support, knowing that we can draw strength from those who have come before us. And as we ask for their presence, the presence of those who have come before, to try and root ourselves into the earth. So cultivating this sense of rootedness and groundedness, really touching your feet into the earth. And as this being's presence is around you and embracing you, as you root into the earth, I also invite you to continue breathing through your heart. And if it's accessible, opening your heart while you root into the earth. Knowing that it's possible for us to really cultivate a quality of rootedness and groundedness with compassion and with openness. And this combination of energy of rootedness and open-heartedness is precisely what the world needs now. So taking a few more conscious breaths. And if your eyes are closed, you can gently open them. It's been really helpful for me at this time to draw upon the strength of those who've come before, to think about my ancestors, and to really recognize the resilience that's in my lineage and that is really in all of our lineages. A practice of mine now has really been around cultivating a sense of inner expansiveness. So often when we talk about mindfulness, particularly mindfulness in education, we talk a lot about self-regulation, but I like to think of it as self-enhancement. And one of my teachers, Larry Ward, talks about this capacity where we utilize mindfulness to enhance ourselves so we can hold greater complexity and greater uncertainty. And this is really how we need to be practicing mindfulness now, as this loving embrace, as this ultimate awareness that is really holding this greater complexity and uncertainty. And for me, the visual of a spacious blue sky has been really helpful in trying to cultivate this sense of inner expansiveness. And I love this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh that if your cup is small, a little bit of salt will make the water salty. If your heart is small, then a little bit of pain can make you suffer. Your heart must be large. And these practices around trying to cultivate an inner expansiveness or spaciousness for me are critical in being able to hold both the pain, but also the possibility in this moment. One of my childhood best friends is a doctor on the front lines in New Jersey, treating COVID patients. And I have people very close to me in my life that have lost loved ones. And I'm sharing the importance of cultivating this inner expansiveness because it's important to recognize the pain, but also recognize that there is possibility in this moment too. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that on one end of the spectrum of how we meet this present moment and envision our future is hope, and the other is despair. So right now, having hope matters. And I'm not talking about hoping that our experience should be different. I mean, that's not mindfulness. I'm really talking about active hope. And active hope is this sense that, hold on one second here. Active hope is this sense that hope is something that we do rather than have. And it's really based on the work of Joanna Macy, who talks about the Great Turning. And the Great Turning is this essential adventure of our time where we shift from an industrial growth society to a life-sustaining civilization, where this Great Turning will bring more connectedness and aliveness. And active hope involves being very clear about what our vision is, and then deliberately playing our role in making that vision a reality. And so my fellow South Asian sister, well before COVID, had said that what if this darkness isn't the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? And so I invite us to pause for a moment and to begin thinking about, what's our vision and what role do we want to play? So let's just take a moment and tune in. What's our vision and what role do we want to play? And it can start with just asking ourselves, who do we want to be during COVID-19? So there's the fear zone, right? There's also the learning zone. And then there's the growth zone. And one of the most powerful ways we can support ourselves and support others in being in this growth zone are mindfulness-based strategies. And so what I'm going to do now is kind of move us into offering a little more of an exploration of what mindfulness is, and then share some strategies that may be supportive for us in moving into the growth zone and supporting others in being in this growth zone now. So what is mindfulness, right? It is a term that is thrown around a lot these days. And so let's just take a moment and reflect for yourself when you hear the word mindfulness, what comes up for you? How would you define it? And I'm going to offer my definition, which is by no means the definition, and it certainly evolved over time. And this is my son here, who you might hear because my husband's putting him to bed right now. And this was when he was 16 months, and he's 25 months, just on the 21st of April. And how I define mindfulness is paying attention to our inner and outer life as it unfolds while being grounded in our body, our breathing, and our senses so that our mind can settle and we can cultivate a curious, open-hearted presence and awareness of interbeing. So I'm gonna go through those points again, paying attention to our inner and outer life as it unfolds, being grounded in our body, our breathing, and our senses, settling our mind, and cultivating curiosity and open-heartedness and an awareness of interbeing. Now, for those of you that may not be familiar with this term interbeing, I'm going to share a little story about when I first really had an experience of interbeing and heard this term interbeing. And when I was ages 26 to 31, I lived in my ancestral homeland of India. And I was really there to study contemplative practices, and I was teaching while I was there. And when I was 28, my adopted city of New Delhi was the site of numerous bomb blasts that were fueled by tensions between Hindus and Muslims. Over the course of 1 month, there were 5 deadly attacks. Our school was under lockdown. And so I've had this experience of living in a really heightened environment before. And under this backdrop, I was really looking for guidance on how to support my students during this tumultuous time. And so on the anniversary of Gandhi's birth, a talk was being held at the site of his martyrdom. And the talk lauded Gandhi's commitment to nonviolent societal transformation. And the speaker was Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, whose quotes I've shared before. And he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And that evening changed my life. In a profound weaving of birth and death, Thich Nhat Hanh challenged us all to be Gandhi's continuation. And he introduced a term that is foundational to creating beloved community and foundational to how we really need to be practicing mindfulness now. And that term is interbeing. So interbeing means to interdependently coexist. It honors the interdependence of every person to all other aspects of our planet. And Thich Nhat Hanh in many ways embodies this sense of interbeing and was transmitting interbeing when he was talking about interbeing that night. And in a beautiful illustration of interbeing, he writes that if you were a poet, you would see clearly that there is a cloud floating in the sheet of paper. Without the cloud, there would be no rain. Without the rain, there would be no trees. And without the trees, there would be no paper. The cloud is essential for the paper to exist. If the cloud is not there, the sheet of paper cannot be there either. And he goes on to say that if you look deeply enough, you can see the logger who cut down the trees and the logger's ancestors as well in the sheet of paper. And so interbeing really helps us see that we exist in this complex web where we are literally inhabiting each other. And if anything, COVID-19's lifted that up even more, where we see how our actions directly impact others. The nonviolence that Gandhi and Dr. King practiced was born from interbeing. Dr. King wrote that in a real sense, all life is interrelated. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. This is the interrelated structure of reality. In the mindfulness and social and emotional learning world, we talk a lot about needing to connect, but the truth is we're already connected, right? We just don't often recognize this. But if we can shift our sense of self from this strongly individuated, separate identity to a connected, collective identity, then we'll view our world, our nation, and the work that we're doing in schools with fresh eyes. But this requires a major paradigm shift where we attune to the intelligence of interbeing. So for me, mindfulness, the foundation really is interbeing. And I love this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh that mindfulness must be engaged. Once they're seeing, there must be acting. Otherwise, what's the use of seeing? Oftentimes we may be going to mindfulness or social emotional learning trainings, but we're not always talking about, well, what is this in service of? And for me, it's really in service of collective awakening in the sense of waking up. So if you are truly practicing mindfulness in this way, where interbeing is apparent, you're not only, drinking your cup of coffee and really tasting it, but you're recognizing that the cloud is in the coffee, right? And you're also recognizing the infinite causes and conditions that have come into play from the soil and the sun and the workers on the coffee plantations. Now, I also want to say that truly tasting and drinking your coffee in and of itself, instead of drinking our worries, which is what we often do, that in and of itself is a radical act of self-compassion. But it's important to remember that ultimately this work of coming home to ourselves is really in service of building a more compassionate and equitable world. And I really believe that now, given the fear and uncertainty, that we really have to move towards this connectedness, and mindfulness and social emotional learning in service of belonging are a vehicle for that. So I do have a lot of friends who are like, I feel you on how mindfulness must be engaged, Meena, but right now I am struggling. I really need to take care of myself. And it starts with ourselves, right? They always say when you fly, put your oxygen mask on first. So I'm going to talk about now 5 strategies for self-care to really support ourselves so we can support others. And the first is resource yourself first. So every day, ask yourself, what's one essential thing I need to do for my well-being daily? Whatever it is, whether it's exercise or cooking a healthy meal, really commit to that one thing, schedule it, make sure it's part of your calendar. I mentioned I have a 2-year-old, and so it's a full day. But I know that for me to really show up for my colleagues and for my son, I have to do that one thing. Now, that one thing for you may not be sitting meditation. It could be exercising. And I want to share this wonderful resource from the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society that I love, this tree of contemplative practices, because it communicates that there are so many ways we can really support communion and connection and awareness, which are the 2 intentions behind all contemplative practices. So you see here, there's so many practices, and all of these practices exist in, a variety of cultural and spiritual traditions. So you don't need to do Vipassana meditation. There are so many ways you can nourish yourself and take care of yourself at this time. So I encourage you, if this is a new resource, to go to the website, contemplativemind.org, and check this out. Another practice that has been really helpful for me are SMART breaks. So these short moments of awareness repeated many times. In my spiritual community in the Palm Village tradition, we use the practice of gathas, which are these short phrases that help us come home to ourselves in each moment. Like, I have arrived, I am home in the here and in the now. I am solid, I am free. In the ultimate, I dwell. Now, they don't have to be a full phrase. You can just come back to yourself with the word peace, or you just come back to your breath. But these micro practices are really helpful, particularly for those of us. I gave a talk once on how my practice shifted and changed once I became a mom. Um, and cuddling my son became a mindfulness practice. So I encourage you to really hold these SMART breaks as central, and find these opportunities to just come home to yourself, whether it's washing the dishes or, really feeling your feet rooted into the earth, taking one mindful breath, right? One mindful breath is better than no mindful breaths. Um, Now, the next practice that I want to lift up is touching, savoring, and soaking in your joy. And this is so vital now. I'm sure many of you are familiar with negativity bias, and negativity bias is really an evolutionary response for our survival, where, if we have two experiences of equal intensity, one that's negative and one that's positive, our psychological state it's gonna privilege the negative experience. And there's been research done by Gottman and Levinson, and they came up with the 5 to 1, which I'm sure some of you have heard about before, that for every negative interaction, we have to counter it with 5 positive interactions. So, in your life, what are the moments of joy that you are experiencing now? And they could be small, they could be drinking that cup of coffee, feeling the wind on your face if you're riding a bicycle. Let's just take a moment now and just touch in what is an experience of joy that you've had. And I invite you to soak that experience in for at least 30 seconds or more. Rick Hansen talks about how our brain is Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive. So we really do have to deliberately practice that 5 to 1. And for those of you who are news junkies, is it possible to limit your news consumption? It's important to be aware, but can you limit your news consumption to just one serving a day for 5 to 10 minutes? Again, how and where we direct our attention is what nourishes us. So really finding what nourishes us and being deliberate about touching, savoring, and soaking in joy. This can also be a time where we realize there are certain things that bring us tremendous joy that we may not have access to. My husband is a basketball fanatic, and he didn't realize how much joy basketball brought him until the NBA, wasn't in season. And I'm sure that when they start playing again, he's going to really touch into that joy in a different way. So again, this is a really powerful practice, touching, savoring, and soaking in your joy. Now, the next practice I want to offer is the reframe, practicing the reframe. And this has been helpful for me well before COVID-19. And so instead of an easy way to practice this is, instead of I have to, I get to. So, many of us that are working parents, the shift from I have to watch my child to I get to, every day it's helpful for me to say this because my son's usually in preschool for 8 hours a day. And even before I have to do the dishes versus I get to, wow, I have a home where I have food and I'm able to have running water. So simple ways in which we can shift can be really powerful. And the next practice within the reframe that I want to share um, is this great reframe on what we're experiencing now from Danielle Laporte. And as I go through these, I invite you to just pay attention to how these words land in your body and being. So versus physical distancing instead of social distancing, how does that feel? We are socially um, uh, we are socially connecting now, even though we're not physically in the same space, and we're not socially distancing, we're physically distancing. Instead of quarantining and locking down, we're retreating for the wellness of all. Instead of isolating, we're protecting our health. And instead of being in fear, we're in choice. I found this reframe to be really helpful. And I also want to mention another way of reframing that I heard a few weeks ago from a teacher in my community, Brother Fapai. And he was talking about how often people ask the question, what's the meaning of life? And shifting that to, how can I bring meaning to this moment? Now, my whole point of sharing about practicing the reframe, touching joy, and resourcing yourself is to lift up that we have agency here. We have agency. And so, how can we utilize our agency so we can really resource ourselves and support ourselves and care for ourselves so we're able to really care for others? Now, the next practice I want to lift up is the practice of watering seeds. And some of you may have heard of this before. We all have seeds inside of us, helpful seeds and unhelpful seeds. And what we choose to water is what grows. Um, if you've been married for a long time, you may sometimes those thoughts come up of, oh, well, the grass may be greener, but the truth is the grass isn't greener anywhere else. The grass is greener when we water it, right? So this practice of watering helpful seeds is really powerful and really important. And mindfulness enables us to be aware of what seeds we're watering. There's the story of the Cherokee elder who tells his grandson that there's two wolves inside of us. There's the wolf that is full of rage and anger, and then there's the wolf that's full of peace and generosity, and they're fighting. And the grandson asks, well, which wolf wins? And the grandfather says, the one you feed. So the practice of mindfulness is so helpful in enabling us to be aware of what seeds we're watering. And this image here from David Hawkins is a map of human consciousness. And he created this utilizing the field of applied kinesiology, and not trying to get too woo-woo on all of you, but our feeling states have energetic vibrational frequencies. And in my own life, I've tried to study this map of consciousness. And so many spiritual teachers have shared that in each moment, we can choose love or we can choose fear. So a way we can immediately try and support ourselves to operating in a higher level of consciousness to just hold the question, what would love do now? Right? What would love do now in this moment? So we can try and operate from this space of love or above. The last practice that I want to lift up is the importance of making self-compassion central. This is a hard time. This is a hard moment. And to deny that, wouldn't be practicing mindfulness at all. I saw this public service announcement a few weeks ago that really spoke to me. And regardless of, what your context is, whether you are a working parent or not, just acknowledging that this is tough and then doing what you can to be a friend to yourself is really important. Practices like affectionate breathing and really just coming back to yourself with tenderness is incredibly important right now. So I want to review these strategies. And as I review them, I'm going to ask you to really hone in on one that you can commit to practicing for the next week or so. So the first strategy is resourcing yourself first. And that was really asking yourself the question, what's one thing I have to do daily that's essential, that's vital for my well-being, and doing that and calendaring it. So first strategy, resourcing yourself first. The second strategy, touching, savoring, and soaking in joy, remembering negativity bias and the importance of countering every negative with 5 positives, so the 5 to 1. The third strategy, practicing the reframe, really shifting from I have to I get to, or how can I bring meaning to this moment, or the larger reframe on COVID that I had shared around, we're not under lockdown, we're retreating for wellness, we're not social distancing, we're physical distancing. So what are ways you can practice the reframe? Watering helpful seeds is the next strategy. How can you be more deliberate in selective watering and watering those helpful seeds inside of yourself? Because what we water is what grows. And then the fifth strategy is making self-compassion central. This is a hard moment, acknowledging that and holding ourselves with tenderness and doing what we can to really shower ourselves with that self-compassion, treating ourselves as a friend would treat ourselves right now. So we just went over some strategies, and I shared a definition of mindfulness. And I also want to preview this resource that Kaylee, if possible, maybe we can send out to folks as a follow-up. So for those of you who are supporting educators, this is a resource that I've put together on integrating mindfulness into virtual professional learning. And these are 6 tips that I have, but I think what's really useful, at least what people have been telling me has been really useful, is I have 2 agenda templates that you can just take and use. And one is around integrating mindfulness into a meeting or virtual professional learning. And the other template is really a template for supporting a virtual educator mindful practice group. So we'll send those out as a follow-up, and you can also get those resources instantly if you go to my website. So let's take a moment and do some reflection and integration. Us educators really love, one more thing I wanted to mention about the resource. As we're making this shift to offering mindfulness and offering connection and care virtually, it's been helpful for me to just create a table and think through, what would I do in person? Why is it important? And what could it look like virtually? And the resource that I just previewed on integrating mindfulness into professional learning spaces talks about that a little more. So here we have the example of using a talking piece, what it is in person, why it matters. And the why it matters piece is really important, because that really lifts up for me why I would want to include it in the virtual offering, and then really brainstorming, okay, so what could it look like virtually? So now we're going to move into a little reflection and integration. And as educators, we love sentence stems, right? So at the start of our webinar, I invited you to reflect on what mindfulness meant to you. And possibly there might be some new learnings. So just pausing for a moment. And what did you used to think about mindfulness, think and feel, and what are you now thinking and feeling about mindfulness? And Kaylee, is there a way I can see the comments?
Yeah, certainly. I can share them with you as we're going. And then also, Jesse just sent you a page where you'll be able to see them coming in on the page where folks are watching.
Okay.
And as Meena is asking these questions, if you're watching on the page, you can scroll to the bottom and there's a comment section there where you can enter your response, so we can sort of get a sense of different perspectives. And if you're watching in YouTube, you can go ahead and write in the chat right there.
Awesome. I'm bringing it up right now. So as folks are writing in.
So you're wanting folks to write in, I used to think and feel mindful.
Yeah, any takeaways? How about this? What you might now be thinking about mindfulness, but also when we, let me bring back the previous slide of those 5 strategies. Oops. What is one that you really want to commit to? You may already be practicing several of these, but what's one that you really want to hold front and center? And then I want to invite folks to actually make a commitment to sharing what that practice is with a colleague or a friend.
And I'll just read, we have some comments coming in also. Folks have been introducing themselves along the way. And so we have Nettie tuning in from Portland Public Schools. Let's see. We have Lisa from West Orange, New Jersey.
Woohoo! I'm a Jersey girl, so.
People are writing on YouTube. Okay. So let's see, we have someone writing a comment in here. I used to think mindfulness was more about silencing my mind, but I now know that mindfulness is a wholesome perspective. It is about self-care, about reframing. I'm going to commit to reframing.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I want to just speak to the silence that, and this really became so apparent to me when I became a new mom, that it's not about silence, right? And is the nature of the mind to wander. The practice is about gently bringing ourselves back, bringing ourselves home, right? That's the practice. It's about gently, kindly, with that curiosity and an open heart, bringing ourselves back. So I encourage folks, we're going to send these resources as a follow-up that, you know, I'm sure if you're tuning in, you are already doing some of these practices, but really committing to holding one of those practices front and center, and then having like an accountability partner or support buddy. You know, this work, the work of mindfulness and SEL, it is not an individual journey, right? So we need to enlist our support buddies, and sharing your commitment to what practice you really want to hold front and center with a colleague. Now, I want to shift a little and talk a little bit about SEL, or social and emotional learning. So this is a term that is used widely, like mindfulness, often without defining it. I used to joke around in professional learning that if you ask 100 people what social and emotional learning is, you might get 100 different answers. And what you see here are some popular frameworks. And in 2017, Ed First actually did a field landscape. And one of the things that they lifted up was the importance of creating coherence across terminologies within the field of SEL. And the National Commission for Academic, Social, and Emotional Development at the Aspen Institute came together, and they've now sunsetted, but they did some really wonderful work around creating coherence and bringing together researchers, policymakers, and practitioners, and even crafted a comprehensive definition for social and emotional learning that we engage with more in an offering that Kaylee and I will talk a little more about towards the end of the webinar. But for purposes of our time today, I really want to think about what is the purpose of SEL and mindfulness in our COVID context, in this new COVID reality. You know, how do we need to be really situating mindfulness and SEL? And in my sharing of mindfulness, I really lifted up the importance of interbeing. And as we talk about SEL, so this is one of the more popular frameworks that comes from the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And they're really the nation's leading organization when it comes to policy, practice, and research of SEL. And in this framework, the self-management and self-awareness refer to our intrapersonal skills, and social awareness and relationship skills are the same color because there are interpersonal skills. And responsible decision-making is its own color, and it's really seen as the culmination or the interplay of the intra and interpersonal skills. This is a wheel because you can't have one without the other, right? You can't be socially aware if you're not self-aware. And Kaylee mentioned that I had worked in Oakland Unified in partnership with Castle for 5.5 years, implementing SEL systemically. And one of the ways in which we defined SEL was as these fundamental skills for life effectiveness. But we also added an equity lens to our definition. And that equity lens was that we strengthen these social and emotional competencies, these 5 core competencies you see here. We strengthen them to so we're better able to connect across race, gender, class, gender identity, sexual orientation, learning needs, and age. So social and emotional learning was really seen as being in service of equity. And I think particularly now, I mean, I've always felt that this was important, but particularly now, this pandemic has revealed for us just the deep inequity that we have in our country. In New Mexico alone, I was reading that 37% of the COVID cases are from Native Americans, but they only make up 11% of the population. And over a third of all COVID cases where race has been reported nationally are African American, yet they only make up close to 13% of our national population. So this pandemic has really further revealed to us the deep inequities that we have. And educational equity means that every child um, has access to their full social, emotional, academic development despite their race, their gender, their ethnicity, their language, disability, family background, and family income. And while it's important to obviously allocate resources equitably, it's even more important to also prioritize educators recognizing the legacy that racism plays in our schools and our school systems. Our whole public education system is is racialized, and so for me, this pandemic has only intensified the importance of mindfulness and social and emotional learning really being in service of belonging ultimately. And a few weeks ago, and as we speak to that, I want to share this definition of transformative SEL. And again, this work is dynamic and evolving. And transformative SEL is a process where students and teachers build strong, respectful relationships founded on an appreciation of similarities and differences. They learn to critically examine root causes of inequity and develop collaborative solutions to community and social problems. Now, there's been work that started on holding an equity lens to those 5 core competencies. And this work is very much dynamic and evolving, and I'm sure it's going to evolve even more with the realities of this pandemic. And I want to just lift up one example of looking at a self-awareness, which is one of the core SEL competencies, without an equity lens and then with an equity lens. So when we're looking at this particular core competency, when we think of self-awareness, we're thinking about labeling our feelings, relating feelings and thoughts to behavior, accurate self-assessment of strengths and challenges, self-efficacy, and optimism. And when we hold an equity lens, we're also lifting up the importance of our social identities. We're recognizing our biases and deriving constructive meaning from our social identities. And we're also grounding in and affirming our cultural heritage. For so long, social and emotional learning was thought to be race and culture neutral, but nothing is race or culture neutral. And this work has to be identity affirming. Last week, Sean Ginwright, who coined the term radical healing, wrote a beautiful article in the San Francisco Chronicle. And in this article, he really lifted up how coronavirus has underscored this need for healing America's racial divisions. And he called for a national day of healing, which I thought was so important for us to memorialize those who've been lost, but also to have an honest conversation about the harm that's caused by racism and sexism and homophobia. And, so many have been talking about how this pandemic is an opportunity for us to press the reset button and really have these conversations about belonging and connectedness. And he says here, what we need now is the courage to correct everything that stands against unity. This pandemic is our best reset button and a cosmic opportunity to reimagine our society where all of us are bound joyously together by the principles of love and justice. So my colleague, James Gallagher, and I had come up with this analogy of building your SEL house. And I want to talk a little bit about the first step, which is the blueprint and foundation for implementing SEL. And that blueprint and foundation have to do with creating community and conditions for learning, which is so connected to the direction we need to go in around having these conversations around belonging and connectedness. And creating community and conditions for learning starts with you, right? It starts with us. And one of the things that's brought me a lot of support and strength throughout my life is kind of summoning those who I admire and connecting with them through their writing. And one of those individuals is the late, great Maya Angelou, who felt that at all times we were asking each other unconsciously these 4 questions. Do you see me? Do you care that I am here? Am I enough for you, or do you need for me to be better in some way? And can I tell that I'm special to you by the way that you look at me? So let's just take those in and remember that we see not just with our eyes, we see with our hearts and our souls. And in order to answer these questions, we have to be fully present. You know, the greatest gift we offer others, Thich Nhat Hanh says, is our presence, is our full presence. And the unwritten curriculum in the classroom is our presence. And this isn't just uh, something that isn't substantiated by research. The article I have up on the right by Stephanie Jones, who's really one of the leading, if not the leading SEL researcher out there, and her colleagues have reported that educators' social and emotional skills are vital to learning. So one of the most powerful ways in which we cultivate that presence, cultivate our adult SEL, is through a regular mindfulness practice. And there's this article here, and maybe we can also send it as a follow-up that I wrote around mindfulness and SEL working together, and how they absolutely need to be working together if we are going to be supporting our students in developing, you know, their full potential. So we're going to transition a little bit, and the title of this offering is Mindfulness and Social and Emotional Learning in Service of Belonging. And this is my son again. And what I want for him more than anything is to feel seen and to feel a sense of belonging. And my son is multiracial. His grandparents were born in Kenya, India, and Japan. And I want to lead us in a little contemplation now on belonging. And so I invite us to just, if it feels safe, close your eyes and bring to mind a moment where you felt connected, where you felt a deep sense of belonging, where you felt seen, and replay that experience again in your mind's eye. And as you replay that experience, pay attention to what feelings may be arising. And if you're in a place where you can speak those words aloud that come to you when you think about this experience. I know for me, I felt a sense of love. I felt a sense of being seen and understood. And just tune into how those words land into your body and your being. And now I invite you to bring to mind a time when you felt excluded, when you didn't feel as if you belonged. Replay that experience back in your mind's eye. Pay attention to the feelings that are arising, any words that may be coming to mind. And if you can, speak those words aloud. And tune into how those words land into your body and your being. I know for me, I felt unworthy, ugly, not valued. And I invite us, if your eyes are closed, you can gently open them, to think back to that consciousness scale that I showed you from David Hawkins around how those feeling states have a vibrational frequency. And the practice of seed watering is not only watering helpful seeds in ourselves, it's around watering those helpful seeds in others, right? That's the practice of selective watering. It's not just selectively watering those helpful seeds in ourselves, it's watering those helpful seeds in others. And we do this work so no one else is othered. For me, that is fundamentally what this work is about. It's so no one else is othered, and that we really advance a world that's built on belonging. And this definition of belonging really speaks to me from Sonali Sangeeta Balaji. And she says that belonging is a state of enacting and being wholeness. It requires an expansive quality, the ability to zoom out and expand our circles of concern and care. Boy, do we need to do that now in our COVID reality, right? Expand our circles of concern and care. And within the process of creating belonging is the need to eliminate or reduce the negative effects of harmful and oppressive structures. Equity-based strategies and decolonizing efforts are intrinsic to the work of belonging. Prioritizing the right to belong is vital in order to have a thriving and politically engaged populace. Now, you can't talk about belonging if you don't talk about power. And it's important to recognize that, because belonging involves co-creating. It involves being fully seen, but also to be able to make demands upon society. And I really learned a lot about belonging from the work of John A. Powell, who you see here, who directs the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society. And he says the opposite of othering is not saming, it's belonging. And in order to understand belonging, we have to unpack othering a little bit. So an example of othering is if you have an institution that only has male and female bathrooms, right? Then you're structurally othering those who don't identify exclusively as male or female. Now, there are different ways in which we other, and othering is harmful no matter what, but there's a power dynamic at play that we have to pay attention to. Now, one of the things that John Powell talks about is in these VUCA times, right? In these volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous times, there are two paths we can take. We can either bridge or we can break. And just a little story. There was a time last fall where I guess you could say I was kind of stalking John Powell. I was really trying to get a hold of him. I wanted him to join the guest faculty of the program that I lead, Transformative Educational Leadership, which he is now on our guest faculty. And for a week, I was like emailing his assistant and calling his assistant every day. And I wasn't really able to get through, but I just knew that, John, for me, like Thich Nhat Hanh, really embodies this expansiveness, this sense of interbeing. And I was saying to myself, gosh, I got to find a way to talk to him, because I know if I talk to him and I tell him about the work that our organization is trying to do, he'll want to join our guest faculty. And so I was meditating a lot on this, and lo and behold, I was out to dinner with one of my friends. Soon after, I was kind of having no luck with getting a hold of him, and he walked into the restaurant that I was eating at. And I, went up to him right away and shared with him how important his work has been for me, and showed him I wear a little intention bracelet that says Bridge Builder, which those of you that have these intent bracelets know what I'm talking about. And I said to him, it seems like your work is grounded in this concept of interbeing. And he said, exactly, it totally is grounded and rooted in interbeing. You can't really talk about advancing a world built on belonging if we don't have this fundamental shift towards an interbeing consciousness. So, bridging is hard work. Social and emotional learning and mindfulness are the how of bridging. And there are long and short bridges. And oftentimes we have to build bridges within ourselves first because we're broken. Uh, but for me, mindfulness and SEL has to be centered in belonging and rooted in interbeing. And this for me is what I feel is my life mission. And this sense making visual that came to me in a dream a few months back um, illustrates that a little more. And I'm reminded by a quote from Cornell West that justice is what love looks like in public, just like tenderness is what love looks like in private. And for me, liberation is very important in my spiritual and ancestral tradition. And I'm not just talking about liberation in a relative sense around freedom, although that's extremely important, but I'm talking about liberation in the ultimate sense, is freedom from the illusion that I am somehow separate from you or of all life. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about how we're here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness. And as a mother, I think so often about what I want to pass on and how I continue on. And this provocation um, uh, from Larry Ward, who's a student of Thich Nhat Hanh, has really spoken to me, that I'll get to in a moment. But that night in New Delhi, Thich Nhat Hanh had us do this exercise where we looked deeply into our hands, where we saw our ancestors and our descendants. And this question of what kind of ancestor am I willing to be, I think is the provocation that we need to hold now in our hearts, particularly in this COVID-19 reality. Larry Ward, who is a teacher in my community, he actually, everywhere he goes, he brings with him a picture of Lucy, our early ancestor, as a reminder that we are evolutionary beings. And some may think we're at the summit, he says, but if we're not careful, we'll just be a stop along the way. So I want to invite us to just do a little exercise. I know that to make things come alive, we have to breathe them in. So let us take a collective breath as we breathe in and hold this question in our hearts of, what kind of ancestor am I willing to be? Really knowing that this is how we need to be practicing and thinking about mindfulness now. My husband grew up in the state of Rhode Island, and the state's motto is hope as an anchor of the soul. And the symbol of the anchor, the cross represents the masculine, and the crescent represents the feminine, or the womb. And it's symbolic that when the anchor is lifted at a port, it symbolizes hope for a new journey. And so I invite us that as we think about and enter into the great unknown, this unfolding of COVID-19, to think about this as the journey into the great turning that Joanna Macy talks about, and to practice active hope as an anchor, just as our breath can be an anchor in our mindfulness practice. And I heard that Arundhati Roy was just doing a live Facebook gathering called Pandemic is Portal. And this is something she said a while back, that another world is not only possible, she is on her way. I can hear her breathing. I want to thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. And I hope you not only got some more strategies for self-care, but that we're also really thinking about how we can hold both the pain, but the possibility in this moment that we're in right now.
Meena, thank you so much for offering this deep dive to our community. And I've always been so inspired by your work, and specifically how you're able to integrate mindfulness and SEL with such a clear commitment to justice and belonging. And so when we spoke a few months ago at this point about this call and being able to offer it, and then also having heard that you were at the time looking at doing an online course that was more comprehensive, introducing your work, I was really excited to be able to offer that to folks. And so yes, thank you so much. And I see we have a little time left. I'd also mentioned in the email that we could have a moment to hear about your course. And like I said, I have so much respect for you and your work, and have been really inspired by your motivation to create this. And so I'd love if you could share with us a little bit about what it is that inspired you to create the course.
Sure. Well, I was called to create it, Kaylee. I mean, I have a beyond full-time job and a 2-year-old. But when the Divine Mother calls and tells me to do something, I listen. And for me, what I felt was really missing in the world of professional development offerings for educators and educational leaders was really a coming together of mindfulness and social and emotional learning, but really in service of belonging. And it's so interesting because, we began talking back in November when I was sharing with you this idea. And it feels like now more than ever, this old way of practicing mindfulness and SEL is just not going to cut it anymore in our new reality, right? We really have to situate mindfulness and SEL in our new COVID-19 context. And it has to be in service of belonging. And it was important for me to use the word belonging rather than equity, because I really felt that it was speaking to something larger, and that this offering is very much rooted in this sense of interbeing. Interbeing, I'm a member of the Order of Interbeing that Thich Nhat Hanh started, and this community was born from the suffering in Vietnam, and it was really born out of this commitment to create collective awakening and to create a new world. And we're at this critical inflection point now where I think we can do that, and building a better world through education. Education is really the vehicle in which that we can create a better world. So I was called to do this. Lots of early morning work, and there's actually 2 courses. There's one for educators, so those who may have more of a classroom context, and there's a course for leaders, because one of the learnings that I had is that leadership is so fundamental. And in designing these courses, the educator course is everything I wish I knew when I was in the classroom, and the leader course is everything I wish I knew before and really during my district level social and emotional learning job. And I think what the course uniquely does, because I do have a foot in each of these fields, in the SEL field and in the mindfulness field, and this deep commitment to justice. For me, mindfulness and SEL have always been centered in justice. There's a reason why Thich Nhat Hanh's my teacher, who's founded, who is a sacred activist. And so bringing together these 3 aspects I felt was so important and was really needed, that you really can't have one without the others in order to affect the change and the transformation that we really need to now.
Thank you. And yeah, for folks that have been watching, this video will stay on this page. So if you want to go back and take more notes or rewatch, this will be available for you. And then also, if you're interested in going further, learning more with Meena through one of these courses, I guess, could you tell us a little bit more about how they're structured or what folks could expect?
Sure. Would it be all right if I did a screen share, Kaylee? Because it might be helpful.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Bear with me, folks. I didn't know if we were going to get here. So as I mentioned, there are these two paths, depending on your context, either a course, SEL every day for the educator. And when I say SEL, for me, it is centered in justice and inclusive of mindfulness. I started my path really with mindfulness and then came to SEL. And so that's the foundation of how I approach social and emotional learning. And then there's this course for the leader, SEL Every Day for the Leader. And the SEL Every Day for the Educator is a 4-module self-paced online course. I know folks are busy. And so when you enroll, you get lifetime access. So start what you want, learn what you want, when you need it. And the course is really focused on equipping you to begin creating a relationship-centered classroom, utilizing instructional practices to promote SEL across academic content, and making SEL explicit in lesson planning while also integrating mindfulness and anti-racist practices into your classroom and life. The tagline for these courses is really around transforming your practice and transforming your life. And I put my heart and soul into them because I believe that this is what I was supposed to offer to the world now. And now with COVID-19, it's just like the timing is just unreal. And there's more than 8.5 hours of video lesson content. So there's a lot of content. I did say it's everything I wish I knew when I was in the classroom. But again, you have lifetime access. And then the other course, the course for the leader, is a 6-module self-paced online course. And that has 21 lessons. It has about 12 hours of video content lessons. And this course is really that, I get so many emails, Kaylee, from folks. That was another reason why I created these courses, because I just know in my heart that the work of leading transformative educational leadership is my soul work. But I was getting so many requests to do PD and to coach folks. But I wanted to honor what I knew my soul work was at this time. So I created these courses as a way for people to have access to my offerings as well. And I get so many emails from folks who want to develop a career as an SEL leader, either within a school district or they're starting an organization. And so this course is really designed to help folks begin leading an equity-informed SEL initiative in their context, whether they're working for a nonprofit, whether they're working in a school district or an independent school. And I've shared a lot, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can take whatever I offer and just make it better and contextualize it, really adapt it for your context. But the more people we have doing this work, the more chance we have in building a better world and moving towards that collective awakening.
Yes, thank you so much, Meena. Thank you for making this course. And so for folks who do want to check that out, there's a button on the page on our website where most of you are watching. You can scroll right below the video. There's a button that'll bring you to Meena's website where you can learn more. And if you're on YouTube, you might want to go back to that page, or we're also working on getting that link there so you can have easy access to it. And then I also just wanted to mention, Meena, I know that you're doing, I appreciate that you're doing a sort of generosity pricing for the next several days till May 8th, actually. And so I believe that you're taking a full $250 off the leader course and $150 off the educator course until May 8th. Is that correct?
I am. I really want to make this as accessible as possible for folks, because again, I believe that we need more people doing this work. This is, if anything, this crisis has revealed that we need to be moving in a totally other direction. And so I want the most amount of people to have access. And so we are taking $250 off the leader course and $150 off the educator course until May 8th. So there's time. And I believe, Kaylee, that folks can actually scroll through the different modules and the lesson titles. I think there's a lot of details on the website that talk, what each module is, what you'll learn, what each lesson is. So folks can get a real sense of what they can expect from the course.
That's great. Yeah. And we did get the link up in the chat on YouTube. So if that's where you are, you can just look in the chat and you'll be able to get it. Or if you're on the page on our website, you can scroll right below the video for easy access. And again, thank you so much, Meena, for this call and also for offering this course. Your inspiration is really clear.
Thank you, Kaylee. And I want to thank everyone. And would it be okay if I just led us in a short closing practice? Is that all right?
That'd be delightful. Thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to generate the collective energy of mindfulness that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about. And we're going to engage in 3 collective breaths together. So with the first breath, I invite you to honor yourself for showing up. Again, how and where we direct our attention now is what nourishes us. So with the first breath, honoring yourself. And now as we move into the second breath, honoring those who are on this journey with us. You may be calling in, thinking that you are alone, but you're not. There are, I believe, more than 1,000 people that registered for this call. So breathing in, recognizing that you are part of a community, that this is not an individual journey. And then with the third breath, I invite us to think about Larry Ward's provocation. What kind of ancestor am I willing to be? To think about the next generation. Think about your students. If you're a parent, bringing your child into your heart. And know that together anything is possible. Reflecting on what our vision is and deliberately playing our role in making that vision a reality. We can move towards that collective awakening. I know it. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking your time to be with us today. And just a heartfelt gratitude for the work you're doing. I know educators are working their tails off now. So take care of yourself so you can care for others. And I'm just grateful to have had this time.
Thank you so much, Meena, and thank you, everyone.